Good afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us for today's complimentary webinar from PCLaw entitled Moving PCLaw to the Cloud with our special guest speaker, CEO of Uptime Legal Systems, Dennis Dimka. Dennis made a decision in 2012 that has brought unparalleled results for the company and its clients. The choice was simple. Uptime Legal would focus exclusively on providing cloud services to small and mid-sized law firms. Today, his company provides hosting, software, and support to more than 500 law firms and thousands of legal professionals in North America. My name is Dave. I'm a marketing associate here at LexisNexis, and I will be your host for today's session. Today's webinar will be a little different. It's an exclusive session for our customers to present the benefits of moving from an on-site server to cloud-based hosting. All of our attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. Please note that we are recording today's event, and all attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to the recording, along with the information for our next office hours session. Well, Dennis, at this time, I will turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you, Dave, for that introduction, and thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. So as Dave said, I'm Dennis with Uptime Legal. I'm the founder and CEO of Uptime Legal Systems, which I founded back in 2005. Since then, I and Uptime have moved hundreds of law firms to the cloud. In doing so, we've received a lot of great awards and recognition in the legal community, the technical community, and the business communities. And along that journey, I've definitely witnessed the right and the wrong way to move a law firm to the cloud. And I hope to share some of those lessons learned with all of you today. So in today's webinar, here's an agenda of what I'll kind of be talking through. I'll start with PCLaw in the cloud, sort of a 101 or getting started. What that is, what that means. And then I'll move into a private cloud 101. How PCLaw works in the cloud is via a private cloud, which I'll talk about, and I'll describe what that is and how it works. Then once we understand PCLaw in the cloud and private cloud, we'll dig a little deeper. We'll talk about how those two work well together. Next, we'll talk about how to do due diligence, what to look for in a legal private cloud provider should you decide to go down that route. And we'll wrap it up with some Q&A at the end. So I definitely encourage questions as we go. Please feel free to type your questions as I'm moving through things in the question and answer box in your window. And towards the end, we'll answer as many of those questions as we can. So that said, let's get started. PCLaw in the cloud. So the reason we're having this discussion in the first place, how we got here, is back in October of 2017, as many of you may recall, LexisNexis announced its formal path to the cloud for PCLaw users. And that path is what's now known as the LexisNexis Authorized Hosting Program. And what that is ultimately is a network of selected pre-authorized cloud service providers to provide a network of companies that provide hosting for PCLaw that is A, fully supported by LexisNexis, which previously there was no such thing. B, that is compliant with the LexisNexis EULA, or End User License Agreement. And C, is provided by companies that have been thoroughly vetted by LexisNexis to take at least some of that due diligence process off your shoulders, though you should still do your own. And again, I'll cover how to do that. And the goal was to do all of that in a model where the software company, LexisNexis, and the hosting provider can work hand in hand and really centralize accountability. You're going to hear me talk a lot about accountability and centralizing it because it is such an important facet when you think about legal technology, legal software, and cloud computing. So that's sort of the what. Let's take a step back briefly and talk about why. Why did LexisNexis decide to do this, and why is this a good thing for not just the legal community, but especially PCLaw users? The answer is multi-part. More and more law firms over the past several years have been wanting to leverage the cloud for their practice to really get all of the benefits that the cloud brings, things like better security, better mobility, better accessibility, better reliability. And while there are a number of web-based legal practice management apps out there, in fact, there have been now for some time, many law firms find just too rudimentary today, especially when you compare those applications against the rich and robust functionality that is PCLaw, for instance. So LexisNexis had a goal, and that goal, knowing that PCLaw is a gold standard of an application for law firms for practice management and accounting, they wanted to give their clients two ways to consume PCLaw, or two ways to use PCLaw, either on-premise, which it's always been, or now cloud or hosted, in a supported synergistic method of delivery. And I'll talk about what that really means shortly. So that path and that solution to solve for that problem is the LexisNexis Authorized Hosting Program. One thing I want to make clear right away for those who don't know is that what I'm talking about is not a new or different version of PCLaw, right? It's not a web-based version. It's not a cloud edition or anything like that. It is the same exact PCLaw that you know and love. The difference is that it's hosted, and it's hosted in a private cloud. So what is a private cloud? Let's talk about Private Cloud 101 and how that relates to PCLaw in the cloud. So what is a private cloud? To answer that question, I have to take a little bit of a step back. So traditionally, legal practice management software, such as PCLaw, required a server for the most part. If you wanted to use the software, you had to have a server to host it, and that was that. So historically, and for decades, what law firms would do is they would buy and maintain an in-house server to host their PCLaw and probably their other things like files and folders and things like that. And then they would hire a local IT consulting group or consultant to manage that server. And that's the way it's been done for many, many years. So today, there's two ways to do it. You can do that same on-premise model, which many of you in the audience may be doing today, or you can host that software in a private cloud. So I told you that PCLaw requires a server. And in the case of PCLaw in the cloud, the private cloud is the server. So another way to say it is that a private cloud will make a non-cloud software or premise-based software cloud-based. Or said another way, a private cloud cloudifies otherwise on-premise software, such as PCLaw. And with the right private cloud solution, it will do more than that. It will also package in other essential IT services that every law firm needs, things like IT support, document storage, email, things like that, right, to create a single platform for all of your firm's technology. So to really break it down and to kind of deconstruct a private cloud, if you will, a private cloud, generally speaking, and every company applies or builds private cloud slightly differently, but it's fair to say that generally, a private cloud is really the combination of the following things. Number one, apps or applications. That is, a private cloud is a hosting platform for your legal and your other software. So from PCLaw to your other productivity and legal apps that your firm uses. A private cloud is also storage, meaning cloud storage, secure cloud storage for your documents and data. Typically, a private cloud is or includes Office licensing built in, and email, typically, but not always, via hosted exchange. A private cloud also is, or I should say includes, maintenance, meaning I shared with you that a private cloud is a server. Well, it's no different from the server that you may have in your office today in that it requires maintenance, monitoring, backups, it needs security. And in the case of a private cloud, all of that is managed for you. And a private cloud is also IT, or at least it should be. A private cloud should include all necessary software and IT support that your practice needs. So that's really deconstructing or breaking down a private cloud. And said another way, a private cloud, if I had to sum it up in a sentence or less, I would describe it as an integrated end-to-end solution that hosts and provides support for all of your firm's technology. So that's the what. That's what a private cloud is. What about why? Why do so many law firms move to a private cloud, and why are so many law firms moving their PCLaw to the cloud? There's a number of answers to that question, and first I'm going to focus on the PCLaw side of that coin, if you're thinking about PCLaw with a private cloud. One of the reasons that law firms do that is because of PCLaw itself. As I alluded to earlier, PCLaw, the application, is candidly more rich and robust than a lot of the web-based or so-called cloud-based counterparts. And it makes sense, right? PCLaw has had decades of development behind it, and over those decades, it's developed a rich set of features and functionality, things that some of the web-based counterparts out there, and I don't want to pick on them, but some of the things that they just don't have or do. Things like, and this is not an exhaustive list, but PCLaw does things like full-fledged accounting, deep financial reporting. PCLaw is very well known for its flexible and comprehensive reporting. Also, it's flexible billing. PCLaw, for instance, also does trust accounting and has deep Microsoft Office integration. So these are just a few things that really makes PCLaw, in our view and in the view of a lot of law firms, better than a lot of the web-based applications out there. And a lot of law firms don't want to have to choose, right? They don't want to have to sacrifice the functionality they've come to rely on over the years for a watered-down web-based alternative. So along those lines, another reason that law firms are moving to a private cloud with PCLaw is they want to keep the software they're committed to. If you use PCLaw today, chances are you've used it for a long time. Chances are you've customized PCLaw to function the way your law firm functions, from the chart of accounts to your financial reports to your billing structures. And perhaps you've slightly tweaked your practice to function really well with PCLaw. And now, presumably, the two fit kind of hand in glove and work well together. And there's a lot of commitment there in terms of not just financial commitment, but time, training your staff, all that. And it's a significant effort to change legal software. Now, I would be the first person, and I spend a lot of time advising law firms on legal technology, I would be the first person to say, though change is hard, if it's worth it, you should do it. Unfortunately, what we find for those law firms that have moved away from more robust applications to lesser or more simplistic web-based ones are that it was a lot of effort and headache for not that much benefit, if any. And last but not least, at least for this slide, another reason that law firms make this transition is because they don't want a piecemeal technology solution. In other words, they want a holistic end-to-end technology solution. And in the case of a private cloud, that private cloud will include hosting for your legal software, hosting for your documents, email, and IT support. So that's why, from the perspective of PCLaw, so many law firms are going this route. Switching gears just a little bit, I'll talk about why private cloud is advantageous over an on-premise environment, kind of on its own merits, because as great as PCLaw is, private clouds definitely have their own merits. So compared to owning and managing an in-house IT platform or an in-house server, a private cloud is, generally speaking, more mobile, meaning your law firm and everyone in it can work anytime, anywhere, seamlessly. This is especially useful if you've got a satellite office, one or two people who work from home, or you're just in other locations, such as the courthouse, and you need to be able to access your PCLaw, your documents, your email, and all of your other applications. Compared to an on-premise environment, a private cloud is also more accessible, allowing you to work on any device. So by accessible, I mean the ability to log in or work from a PC, a Mac, an iPad, an Android tablet, even a Chromebook. And it really makes the devices you're connecting from a whole lot less relevant. Generally speaking, a private cloud is more secure than an on-premise environment. Cloud providers typically deliver bank-grade security, right? They're companies that are in the business of building and managing a secure infrastructure, and they spend their days monitoring and managing exactly that. Now compare that to, say, a typical law firm who might have a server sitting in a coat closet or copy room. Even if they have a really good IT guy or consultant, there's just no comparing that to the level of security that a reputable private cloud provider brings. Similarly, a private cloud is generally more reliable. Cloud providers typically guarantee 99.99% uptime because, again, same reason. They're in the business of building and managing a reliable infrastructure. Now, you may have noticed that I put an asterisk at the end of those last two and that I use the word typically or usually. That's because, unfortunately, not all cloud providers or not all clouds are created equally. So it is important to do your homework and do your due diligence to make sure that you're finding a cloud provider that is secure and that is reliable. And I'll help you with that towards the end of our webinar. Compared to owning and managing an in-house IT environment, a private cloud is also more scalable. In fact, they're theoretically infinitely scalable as your law firm grows. So typically in an on-premise environment, if you need to add a handful of staff, maybe your firm hires 3 new people, or maybe your law firm acquires another smaller firm, or you need to add a new application, a new piece of software into the mix, or you just need a lot more space as you acquire more documents. Typically, eventually, that will require you to either buy a new server, significantly upgrade your server, or something like that, right? The growth is very sort of choppy, if you will. Whereas with the cloud, everything should be more of a smooth growth curve. If you need to add space, you can do it pretty quickly and pretty cost effectively. If you need to add users or applications, typically, you can do that easily and know exactly what that additional capacity will cost. Speaking of cost, traditionally, private clouds are more economical in a few ways than on-premise. With a private cloud, there's no capital expenditure, right? You're not buying any servers. And instead, you have an operating expense, right? A predictable monthly cost. And with the right platform and the right company, not only is it a fixed monthly fee, but you should know exactly what that would be in any scenario. So that if you're looking on bringing on 3 more employees, to use that example, you should be able to look at the fee schedule or however your cloud provider functions and know exactly what that's going to cost you. So it is more economical and it's more predictable. And I think that last one might be key. And finally, compared to an on-premise environment, a private cloud is more centralized. Everything sort of lives in one single central system, right? Your PCLaw, your documents, your email, which means a consistent user experience from any location. Whether you've got multiple offices, or you've got that one attorney who works out of state, or you've got people who like to work from home, or people who are logging in from the courthouse. Without a private cloud, if your firm is using anything today like, say, a VPN, or LogMeIn, or Go to My PC, not to pick on those, but they tend to be clunky and they tend to be a very different experience working remotely versus working in the office. And a private cloud really makes that the same experience regardless of where you're working from. On a related but slightly separate note, I want to talk just a minute about security and compliance because it's so important. You can't really open the newspaper these days without seeing some headline of somebody being hacked. And while nothing is hack-proof, hackers are becoming more and more sophisticated, so it really is incumbent on all of us, whether you're a law firm or some other business, to take security and compliance seriously. And a private cloud is a great way to sort of hit the easy button on that. And it makes sense, right? If you consider what goes into the security of a reputable cloud service provider, and then you compare that to, again, a server, say, sitting in a coat closet, more or less on autopilot, it makes sense. So this bulleted list here is a standard, though not exhaustive list of what I would say is pretty standard fare for security from a private cloud provider. So a private cloud provider will give you things like military-grade encryption, 24/7 by 365 security monitoring. So monitoring for hack attempts, monitoring for failed login attempts. And by the way, we're not just talking about hackers. You know, security threats and more pervasive ones, honestly, are things like rogue or former employees, things like that. Private cloud providers will usually bring enterprise-grade firewalls to the mix. They'll often have intrusion prevention and intrusion detection systems. They ought to build in virus and malware protection. More importantly, systems are great, but even more important are the people monitoring and managing those systems. So they'll have dedicated people monitoring and managing all of these systems and generally managing the security on the whole. And they'll bring things to the table like for better compliance, things like 2-factor authentication. password and login requirements, or NIST standards. These are all things that otherwise you or your IT consultant is sort of left to figure out, define, and then put into place. And it's an undertaking. So with the right private cloud provider, a lot of this stuff is just handled for you. And last but not least, private cloud providers always have a data center, and the physical access to that data center is carefully guarded, right? So I didn't mean to get too in the weeds there, but just kind of a high-level list of the type of things you can expect with a private cloud provider. And it used to be that only large companies had access to this level of security, right? So rewind the clock, say 10 years, very large Fortune 500 companies, their environment looked like this below the list because they're huge and they had lots of money and lots of resources. And smaller companies, such as small or mid-sized law firms, just couldn't do it. They hired a local IT person, bought an entry-level firewall, and hoped for the best, right? That's all they could do. And what's so amazing about cloud computing, and why I'm personally so evangelical about it, is just this concept of economies of scale. So cloud providers, say such as us, have built the same kind of environment or infrastructure that, say, a Fortune 500 company would have with all of these trappings and beyond security too. And every customer of that private cloud company gets their own little slice of that sophisticated, again, Fortune 500 caliber infrastructure. So that's what cloud computing does. It's a great equalizer. It makes this available for businesses and law firms of all sizes. So I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about how it works. So in a private cloud, none of your software, such as PCLaw or Office or any of your other apps, are actually installed and running on your desktop. They're all actually installed directly on the private cloud servers themselves. And really what that does is it makes your desktops or laptops really just so-called dumb terminals. So via a virtual desktop, you're able to log in from any device, as I said, into your virtual desktop that each user in your firm has. And from there, inside that virtual desktop is where you'll find your PCLaw, your client files, your G Drive or your S Drive, your Outlook, really all the same technology that today runs on a combination of your desktop and your on-premise server, assuming that's what you're doing, now lives and runs in the server via the virtual desktop. And that's kind of what you see in this picture here. The image on the left sort of represents what your local desktop may look like after moving to the cloud. You have very little on it, very little, if anything, is installed on that computer, again, making it interchangeable. And then you log into your virtual desktop, and within that is where your PCLaw and everything else sort of lives. It's really, really great. It gives you kind of a home base, so to speak, that whether you're logging in from home, from work, a client's computer even, a brand new computer that you just bought, you log into your virtual desktop, and there everything is just the way you left it. And it really helps you untether yourself from your one desktop or your one laptop. So now that we've covered the basics of PCLaw in the cloud, and we've covered the basics of a private cloud, let's dive in a little deeper and talk about and explore how the two really work well together. So I'm going to use our own private cloud service, which we call Uptime Practice, as an example, because it's the one I'm most familiar with. So when you think about PCLaw and a private cloud, or in this case, PCLaw and Uptime Practice, first I'm going to talk about the platform itself, what that's all about. So in the case of Uptime Practice, or presumably any good legal-centric private cloud, the private cloud is custom built for PCLaw. I spend a lot of time talking with existing prospective customers, many of which came from on-premise server environments. And what I would always ask, what are the drivers? What for you is prompting you to look at cloud solutions? And the answers are often many, and they include some of the things I've already talked about, like they want better security, they want better mobility. But another one is, we just don't think our server is quite optimized for PCLaw, or perhaps we don't know if our IT team, as good as they are, know PCLaw really well. So a private cloud is a cloud server that is custom built and optimized for PCLaw to give you the best performance of the software. So it's optimized for PCLaw best practices, ranging from SQL Server, how it's configured, down to some of the finer details like how much RAM, what kind of CPU, how resources are allocated and configured. All of that is, or at the very least ought to be, perfectly optimized to run PCLaw, whether you're 3 users or 20 users or 50 users. And of course, because the server is both provided and managed for you, there are no server management or IT headaches required. Because PCLaw, like any software, will not run well if it's on a server that's under-spec'd, meaning not enough resources, underbuilt, or simply misconfigured. That's kind of the name of the game, I think, is to have a, for lack of a better word, a cookie-cutter, ready-to-go environment optimized for PCLaw. So that's the platform. A platform or any technology system is only as good as the people managing and supporting it, right? So a legal-centric private cloud provider will have or should have a very good team behind it. A team where that hosts and supports your practice and your PCLaw, such that your PCLaw software is migrated by PCLaw certified consultants, meaning migrated to the cloud, supported by PCLaw certified consultants, and updated by PCLaw certified consultants. So whether it be an error message that you need help troubleshooting, or installing the latest update to PCLaw itself, the same team responsible for managing the server and the security and the support should also be responsible for updating and supporting your PCLaw and your other legal applications. Because that two parties for accountability there is where a lot of finger pointing happens, unfortunately. So we've talked about the platform, we've talked about the team, let's talk about the result. So the result of that synergy, right, of the cloud service provider and the software company and product working hand in glove is this: optimal performance of PCLaw software in terms of speed, issues, things like that. Cooperation between the cloud service provider and the software company, of course, LexisNexis. The result is also that software updates are, again, managed for you. And this is the one, this next one, single point of contact for support. I often will ask clients of ours here at Uptime Legal who have moved to our platform, I'll check in with them 6 months, a couple of years later, and I'll ask, of all of the things, the accessibility, what do you like the most? What's the one thing that makes you say, yes, this was the right decision? And again, the answers I'll get to that question vary, but the one I probably hear the most consistently is they say, we love the single point of contact for support. Because if there's a challenge or an issue, we don't know, is it a software problem, a server problem? Is it perhaps a local network problem here in our building? And with a single point of contact for support, you don't need to know. You just need to know who to call. And the private cloud company will take it from there. So really the result, if I had to sum it up, is just simply less drama and less stress. Now, part of a private cloud service is 100% cloud-based or remote IT support, which means the cloud service provider, in addition to hosting your servers and your software, also provides support, or at least should provide support, for your team and all of your local stuff, right? And by stuff, I mean your desktops, your laptops, your printers, your scanners. And sometimes when I'm describing this to a law firm that's considering it, they'll say, wait a minute. I've always had on-site IT care, right? A local person or team that comes out here and provides services I need. How can a cloud service provider completely support me remotely? And those questions really come from, I think, a lot of misconceptions about not just about cloud, but about remote support and how IT support ought to work in 2018. So I'll talk through some of those common misconceptions, and I'll talk a little bit about the realities behind those. So one common misconception I hear is, my IT support needs to be on site to deal with hardware issues, right? And that's the misconception. The reality behind that particular misconception is that the cloud, as I've described, makes devices interchangeable. Right, so devices like laptops and desktops are very interchangeable. Nothing's installed on any one of them, and you're not reliant or tied to any one of them. And then the remainder of your devices, so think printers, scanners, wireless routers, modern versions of each of those all have remote management capabilities. So in practice, with our own team, we can log into a client's printer or scanner, troubleshoot it, update it, reboot it, do what we need to do to fix it. Another misconception I'll hear sometimes is, hey, Dennis, in an emergency outage, I need someone to be able to come out and get my critical equipment back online. In other words, just that fear of, what about some emergency? How do you support me? The reality there is that when your server is in the cloud, because we've gotten rid of your server in this scenario, right? We've moved you to a private cloud. Your local environment becomes very simple to support, right? Because you're left with what? Desktops, laptops, printers, scanners, and a router, probably a wireless router. And that's it. I mean, your office, even if you have 20, 30, 50 employees, becomes about as simple to support as a home environment, as a home network, right? There's no servers. And when you really look at what creates the complexity in an on-premise environment, meaning if you have a server and that server has a backup system and it has a battery backup and it has all these ancillary things, that's where 80% of the complexity lives, which means when there's problems, 80% of your technology problems are going to be directly or indirectly related to that server and its related items. So when that's gone, 80% of the problems, let's just say, go away. And that's a bit of an oversimplification, but it's pretty accurate. Another misconception or maybe notion that I hear some people might say is, hey, Dennis, I just like having an IT support person that I can look in the eye and shake their hand, right? They just like that kind of relationship-based approach. And the answer is, so do we. But candidly, it's not an efficient use of your dollars. So cloud technology brings, one of its fundamentals is it brings efficiency. A private cloud support team will give you arguably more hands-on service and faster, right? Because they can do everything remotely than a local IT group could possibly. And when you think about, again, and a lot of this comes back to being with the right cloud provider that really has this down, but if your team calls in having a problem with a laptop or a printer, again, I'll keep using that example, the private cloud team ought to be able to log into that user's laptop and the printer in a matter of minutes and fix the problem very quickly, as opposed to, say, some local IT consultant driving out to your site to take a look at it. So hopefully, and these are just a handful of misconceptions or notions that we hear sometimes, hopefully this helps demystify and sort of take the unknown out of what does 100% cloud-based IT support look like. So, doing your due diligence. If you've decided, maybe already or maybe after kind of going through what we've just covered, that a private cloud or generally moving your PCLaw to the cloud is the right path for you, or at least worth looking, you'll definitely want to do your due diligence. So next I'll cover what to look for in a cloud service provider. As I said earlier, not all clouds are created equal. And I'll start with who to avoid, right? What kinds of companies or what kind of signs to look for in terms of what kinds of companies to avoid. Some of these are general, some of these are specific. So number one, avoid small or fly-by-night companies. Unfortunately, for the market that is, a lot of small companies have decided to kind of spin up their own cloud offering because there's money to be made in it, because it's just the trend, and it does create a lot of sort of a Wild West environment, if you will, of a lot of smaller fly-by-night companies. Not to say all small companies are fly-by-night, but enough of them are. You should also avoid the local IT company that, quote, does cloud too now. For some of those same reasons, because IT companies are often spinning up their own cloud offerings, right? Many of them are, unfortunately for them, losing business to the cloud, or they just simply want a new service or offering to capitalize on. The problem with that is private cloud isn't kid stuff, right? I mean, it's something that really takes a lot of expertise and a lot of resources, candidly. So while the allure of your local IT guy who you know and trust and his new cloud offering might be compelling, I would really do your due diligence before going down that route. I would also advise avoiding companies that are not part of LexisNexis's authorized hosting program. Again, they went to considerable lengths to vet the companies in that network for a good reason. I would avoid any company that is not exclusively committed to law firms. To me personally, this is a particularly important one because One of the reasons, and I'll talk about our own clients, one of the reasons our clients are so thrilled is because of that deep level of expertise in supporting PCLaw, updating PCLaw, as well as other Lexis products. And we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have dove so deep and learned so much about not just legal software, but also the culture of law firms if we were focused on even one more industry. And that's the thing about cloud generalists, which is the term we use for companies that host any industry, is it's kind of well, we can't get too deep into every piece of software for every industry. There's just too many. So we're going to sort of take an approach of, hey, if your cloud's up and running and you can log into it, our job here is done, right? And our goal, and I think the goal of Lexis when they developed this program, was to create a scenario where, again, one party could be accountable all the way down the stack, right? From servers to software to everything. So for that reason, avoid companies that are not exclusively committed to law firms. Avoid companies that service any other industry besides law firms, in our advice. And along those lines, a good litmus test for that is naturally you should be asking for references as you're exploring companies. And a good way to test for that previous requirement is to ask for no less than 10 references of law firms that use their service. And ultimately, each of these that I'm advising you to avoid are really the high-risk options, right? And that's the name of the game, is to de-risk your decision to move to the cloud. So what are the risks of selecting the wrong provider? Some of these may be self-evident, or you may have already thought of, or may be already giving you some anxiety, but I think it's important to outline them for a minute. Risks include data loss, right? If there's an outage or a crash or just a procedural mistake, you risk losing data. You also risk a security breach. Building and managing a secure environment isn't inexpensive. So some of those other demographics I described, small fly-by-night companies, small local IT companies, can't or won't put in the resources to secure their environment. You also risk, of course, downtime, lost productivity. You lack a limited support scope, and that's a particularly important one. As I sort of described, a generalist or a cloud provider not committed exclusively to law firms might have a very narrow scope. Again, it might be, hey, if you can log in, our job here is done. Or we can't troubleshoot and support your software. We're not certified in it. We're not trained in it, and you're going to have to call the software company. And that limited support scope can cause a lot of headaches. You also risk unplanned costs or fees, either because that support scope is limited and anything beyond that is extra, or because you have to supplement your private cloud service by hiring additional IT consultants to fill in any gaps. You risk lack of familiarity with PCLaw. And you ultimately risk an unsupported environment. So now that I've adequately scared you, that's what to avoid. So what should you look for? There are honestly many, many things, many factors I would say to look for to hold a potential cloud hosting company up against to determine if they're right for your firm. And I'll share with you when we're done here, a few resources to help you do more due diligence. But here I've laid out about 8 things that are maybe the most important factors or requirements when you're searching for a private cloud company to host your PCLaw. Number 1, they should be a cloud-first company. And by that I mean cloud should be their first and primary business. For the same reason I described earlier, other companies, sometimes software companies, sometimes telecoms, will spin up a cloud service, right? Or again, a local IT company. And as a result, it's secondary, it's not their core business, which means it's not their core competency. So they should be a cloud-first company. 2, for all the reasons I described, they should be exclusively committed to legal. Again, you just can't, it's too big a world to be truly an expert in, honestly, more than one industry, right? So if your cloud service provider has a menu of 6, 7, 8, or even 3 industries that they service, chances are they don't dive deep into any of them because they can't. 3, make sure they have a really good industry reputation. Right? And that's an easier one to do. Do some homework, do some Googling on the company. You should find anything from bar association mentions to awards. Look for things in, again, the legal and the technical communities to validate that they do have a solid reputation. Worse yet, if they don't have any reputation. Number 4, data sovereignty. Ensure that your data will always be stored exclusively in the US or Canada. Some of these so-called public cloud services, like say Office 365 or Dropbox, they'll either say that they will store your data overseas, or in some cases that they'll back it up overseas, or they're very ambiguous or vague about where they will, because they want the flexibility to change where they're doing that. And naturally, that creates a significant data sovereignty issue for you and for your privileged client information. 5, data ownership. Read the fine print and make sure your data stays your data. That one might seem a bit like a no duh, but certain, again, public cloud providers is where this is more common. It's either ambiguous or in some cases very clear that there's a co-ownership of the data once you store it in their cloud. Obviously, that is unacceptable for a law firm, so always make sure that your data stays yours. 6, backups and cybersecurity. You want to make sure the private cloud provider has a comprehensive backup, recovery, and numerous cybersecurity systems in place, right? Some of the things that I mentioned earlier when I talked about security. The private cloud provider should not only have these, but they should have them well documented. And while they may not share everything with you because they have to maintain some level of privacy and security, they should be able to give you a pretty clear picture of both their backups and their security systems to help you sleep better at night. 7, infrastructure and data center. Ensure the provider owns their own equipment and they're not simply reselling a public cloud. So the latter often comes part and parcel with some of the other demographics I described, local IT companies or just small, more fly-by-night companies. It's a significant investment to build a reliable, secure private cloud environment. So unfortunately for you guys potentially, is that a lot of these smaller companies will simply resell Amazon or Azure, which really, really takes a lot of control and accountability out of their hands. And coming back to why this makes sense in the first place, the name of the game is to create accountability, right? To have one party that can be accountable for the servers, the software, and everything. And if they don't own the equipment, they can't be accountable. So that's very, very important. And last but not least, support and authorization. In the case of PCLaw, make sure your chosen private cloud provider is an authorized hosting provider for your software. So that's an intro on how to do your due diligence. And that really wraps up most of what I wanted to cover today. My goal today was just to give everybody just a little bit of an introduction into, again, PCLaw in the cloud, private cloud, how it works, how to do your due diligence. But I definitely encourage everyone attending to do some more research if this is of interest to you. Both LexisNexis and Uptime Legal have some great online resources, white papers, ebooks, blogs, great ways to educate yourself. And I'll point out just a few that I handpicked that I think relate well to the subject of PCLaw in the cloud. So I would recommend for further reading this ebook. It's called Law Office in the Cloud, How and Why You Should Move Your Law Practice to a Private Cloud. And it covers a lot of what I talked about today in even more detail. And you can get it by clicking the link at the bottom of this slide. And for those of you who are attending live, this deck will be available as a PDF that you can use to click and follow these links. I mentioned this one too. I would also recommend, if you are evaluating cloud providers, our white paper on 25 things to ask your legal cloud service provider. I covered about 8 of them, or exactly 8 of them, just a minute ago, but I alluded to the fact that there are more. There's about 25 total, 25 factors or things that really should be your due diligence list. And you can download that at the link below. And of course, we encourage you to get in touch. The team at LexisNexis is able and ready to help and to answer your questions, so please feel free to reach out to us, which you can do by following the link below. And that said, I'll turn it back over to Dave for some Q&A.
Thank you, Dennis, for your very informative session. This does conclude the presentation portion of our webinar. Before we start with our Q&A, I have a few reminders to our listeners today. If your questions were not answered today, They will be covered in our next session. A registration link will be sent along with the recording of today's session and a follow-up email that you will receive within 1 week of this session. Having said that, Dennis, we're ready for our first question. Here it comes. Can a private cloud host my other software, such as WorldDocs, WordPerfect, or Olympus Dictation?
It's a great question. The short answer is yes, or at least it should. So a private cloud, or at least the right private cloud solution, will host all of your firm's software, right? So your document management software, your billing software, your accounting software, your dictation software, everything should live and run from that same single central platform. And your team should be able to access all of it within the same virtual desktop. So that's a great question. Next question.
Okay, next. Okay. What happens if I move my PCLaw to a private cloud? Can I get my data back?
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's one that I'm asked a lot too. And the answer, of course, is it depends. It depends on the cloud provider and their terms and their agreement. So I can speak to how we do it. The way we do it at Uptime Legal is the term of our service is month to month. We aim to give the firm the flexibility to change paths if they need to. And should a client cancel for any reason, we'll provide all of their data, right? So their PCLaw database, their documents, their email, so that they can move to wherever they want to move to. Back on premise for some reason, to a different cloud for some reason, perhaps they're being acquired by a larger firm. But whatever the case, that should absolutely be in your due diligence checklist in terms of what to ask the companies you're evaluating. What's the term? How do I get my data back? Next question.
Okay, our next questioner asks, will a private cloud allow me to use PCLaw from my Mac?
Yes. There's a lot of Mac enthusiasts in the legal community, and unfortunately, to this point, it's been tricky. There's no real way to run PCLaw or any Windows-based software on a Mac very well, and I realize there's some alternatives like Parallels. But yes, a private cloud will host all of your Windows-based software, and then you can access that virtual desktop and the applications within that virtual desktop from a Mac, again, an iPad, an Android tablet, virtually any device. Next question.
Okay, our questioner wants to know, what happens if my cloud provider is served with a subpoena for my data?
Good question. So your chosen cloud provider should definitely have a clear documented policy on how to deal with subpoenas if they're ever served one regarding your firm's data. And the risk there is that an unsophisticated cloud provider or just a non-legal centric hosting provider that just isn't used to the goings-on within the legal world might hastily react to a scary-looking legal letter, subpoena, or something like that. Whereas when I talk about a cloud-first company and a legal-first company, will know better, right? Or at least they ought to know better. And they'll have a clear process for notifying you immediately before responding to any subpoena so that you can quash it, so you can respond, so you can do whatever it is you decide to do. Also, that should be in your list of due diligence questions as you're evaluating cloud providers, because that's a good one.
Thank you, Dennis, for answering the questions. This does conclude the Q&A portion of our webinar. Get in touch with the LexisNexis team to learn more about PCLaw and the cloud for your firm. In closing, there is a brief survey at the end of our webinar today that we ask you to please take a moment to complete. Your feedback will help us in planning our future webinars. Thank you all for your time today.